Found herself in a dark forest, standing before an ancient wrinkled woman cloaked in shadows. "You have my gift," the woman hissed, her eyes gleaming with embers. "Beauty has a price, child." Amaka tried to speak, but the words were stuck in her throat. The old woman extended a skeletal hand, pointing to the palette in Amaka's grip. "Once beauty consumes, it destroys," she whispered ominously before vanishing into the mist. Amaka was a makeup artist struggling to make ends meet in the bustling city of Lagos. Business was slow, and despite her talent, she found it difficult to attract clients in a competitive industry. One rainy afternoon, she wandered into a local market, hoping for some inspiration. Amid the clutter of second-hand goods, her eyes caught an ornament palette, intricately designed with symbols she didn't recognize. She felt an inexplicable pull towards it and, without a second thought, bought it with a small sum. Little did she know that her life was about to change forever. Excitedly, she returned to her small studio and examined her new acquisition. The palette was unlike anything she had ever seen. The colors rich and luminous, almost pulsating with an otherworldly glow. She applied the swatch to her wrist, marveling at how smoothly the pigment blended. That night, she dreamed of vivid colors and faces she had never seen, all radiating in haunting beauty. In the morning, she awoke with an intense eagerness to test the palette on her clients. Her first customer the next day was Ngozi, a shy young woman preparing for a job interview. Amaka applied the makeup from the new palette, layering colors with precision and noticing how each stroke seemed to bring her client's features to life. When she finished, Ngozi stared into the mirror. She looked breathtakingly beautiful, as if her features had been subtly altered to perfection. Amaka was amazed at the transformation, and a spark of hope flickered into her. Maybe her fortunes were finally changing. Ngozi couldn't stop admiring herself, her fingers fraying over her own face as if she was seeing it for the first time. She thanked Amaka profusely and left, but her behavior left a strange impression. As Amaka cleaned her brushes, she couldn't shake the feeling that something about the makeup had been intense. She dismissed it, attributing it to her excitement about the palette's effect. She didn't even realize that it was only the beginning of a dark transformation. Words of Amaka's newfound magic spread quickly. Within days, her studio was packed with clients eager to experience her extraordinary talents. Every client she worked on left looking stunningly transformed, each face an embodiment of their most beautiful self. Amaka felt exhilarated, finally seeing her dream come to life as more clients booked her services. The palette had changed everything. It seemed like her secret charm, a hidden power that gave her work a mesmerizing quality. As more clients poured in, Amaka noticed something odd. Each client's reaction was unusually intense. They would stare at their reflections for long periods, a look of obsession in their eyes. She overheard a few of them talking about how they couldn't stop looking at themselves even at home. Amaka brushed it off as normal vanity, but a small nagging worry began to creep into her mind. What exactly was in that palette? Over the next few days, Amaka began to notice changes in her client's behavior. One of her regulars, Ifeoma, returned for a touch-up, looking visibly agitated. She spoke in rapid, disjoint sentences, constantly checking her reflection in her phone. "I can't stop thinking about how I look," she confessed, almost trembling. "I feel like if I'm not perfect, I will disappear." Her words chilled Amaka, but she tried to reassure Ifoma, saying she looked beautiful as always. As Ifoma left, Amaka's mind raced with questions. The obsession with beauty, the dependency on her services, it was unsettling. That evening, she examined the palette closely, noticing the faint glimmer of an inscription along the edges. She couldn't read the language, but a strange chill settled over her as she traced her fingers over the symbols. What had she gotten herself into? That night, Amaka had a vivid, disturbing dream. She found herself in a dark forest, standing before an ancient, wrinkled woman cloaked in shadows. "You have my gift," the woman hissed, her eyes gleaming with embers. "Beauty has a price, child." Amaka tried to speak, but the words were stuck in her throat. The old woman extended a skeletal hand, pointing to the palette in Amaka's grip. "Once beauty consumes, it destroys," she whispered ominously before vanishing into the mist. Amaka woke up in a cold sweat, her heart racing. The words echoed in her mind, filling her with dread. She tried to convince herself that it was only a dream, but deep down, she knew there was something sinister about the palette. She decided to go back to the market the next day to ask about the origins, hoping to find some answers. Returning to the market, Amaka searched for the store she had bought the palette. She found the elderly woman who had sold it to her, seated amidst the collection of old trinkets. When Amaka asked about the palette, the woman's expression darkened. "That palette once belonged to Adora, the beauty sorceress," she whispered. "She used it to enchant people, to draw them in with beauty, until they lost themselves entirely." Amaka's heart sank. "Why would you sell me something so dangerous?" she asked, her voice trembling. The woman shrugged. "Magic is a tool, child. Its powers depends on the user's intent." She handed Amaka a small warm amulet. "This may protect you if the magic turns against you. But be careful. Adora's spirit cling to her palette. It does not let it go easily." After her visit to the market, Amaka returned to work with a heavy heart. Despite the warning, she continued using the palette, convinced she could control its power. But her clients' behavior grew stranger by the day. One of them, a young model named Chika, called her in a frenzy. "Amaka, I don't know what's happening. I can't stop looking at myself. I'm afraid I will lose this beauty if I blink." The desperation in Chika's voice terrified Amaka. She advised Amaka to stay calm, but deep down, she knew the problem was more complex than mere vanity. As she hung up, Amaka clutched the amulet tightly, hoping it would offer some protection. She wondered how long she would continue using the palette before the consequences came irreversible. As more clients exhibited obsessive behavior, Amaka began to question her actions. She tried using other makeup products, but her clients demanded the magic palette. Her reputation grew, but so did the sense of her fear gnawing in her heart. She couldn't ignore the evidence. The palette was cursed, and it was consuming her clients one by one. One evening, Amaka resolved to stop using the palette altogether. She locked it away in a drawer, hoping to distance herself from its influence. But as she was closing the drawer, a wave of dread washed over her. The palette seemed to pause, as if it were alive, waiting patiently to be used again. The next day, Amaka's client grew frustrated when she refused to use the palette. "Please, Amaka," one of the regulars, Amina, begged, her voice laced with desperation. "I need that magic touch. I can't bear to look like myself." Amina's pleading eyes haunted Amaka, and she nearly gave in. But she steeled herself, insisting she would still create a beautiful look without the palette. However, as she applied different products, her clients' dissatisfaction became palpable. They muttered under their breath, glancing at the locked drawer where the palette lay. The more Amaka resisted, the more their demand intensified. They accused her of upholding her magic, of keeping them from their true beauty. Amaka felt trapped, haunted by her very client she has once been eager to impress. And just as she feared, by the end of the day, the palace seemed to call her with an irresistible pull. That evening, Amaka found herself unable to resist any longer. The temptation to open the drawer, to feel the palette's power once again. It was overwhelming. She reasoned that she could use it sparingly, just for special clients. It was, after all, her most prized obsession, one that had elevated her business and brought her recognition. With a shaky hand, she unlocked the drawer and took out the palette, feeling its cold, weighty surface pulse in her grasp. As she stared at it, the symbols along the edges seemed to shimmer, almost alive. She swore she heard a whisper, soft, seductive, promising beauty beyond measure, though her instincts screamed against it. Amaka made a silent promise to use it only when absolutely necessary. But as she stared at her reflection, a dark thought flickered in her mind. What would happen if she tried it on herself? Amaka's curiosity got the better of her, and she carefully applied the palette to her own face. As she layered the vibrant color on her skin, she felt a strange warmth spread through her, as if the palette were seeping beneath the surface. When she finished, she looked into the mirror and gasped. She was transformed, her features sharper, her eyes brighter, her skin flawless. It was as if the palette had unlocked a hidden beauty she never knew existed. But her exhilaration was short-lived. Her heart began to pound, and a dizzy sensation took over her. She felt as if the mirror itself were pulling her in, drawing her deeper into her own reflection. Desperately, she looked away, clutching the amulet for comfort. As the room spun around her, she realized the palette's allure wasn't just its ability to transform appearances. It wanted more, her very essence. The next morning, Amaka awoke feeling drained, as if the palette had siphoned her energy. She decided to lock it away for good. But something deep inside her resisted. She couldn't deny the allure it had, the power it gave her. Her clients began demanding appointments, some even becoming aggressive, their obsession over their appearance spiraling into desperation. They seemed haunted, like hollow versions of themselves, driven by an insatiable need to see themselves in the mirror. One client, a young socialite named Kemi, nearly broke down in her studio. "I can't recognize myself anymore, Amaka," she sobbed. "I feel like I'm vanishing." Amaka's heart raced as she watched Kemi's haunted eyes, realizing that each application of the palette was stripping something fundamental from her clients. But what terrified her more was the growing hunger within herself, the whisper that urged her to use it again, just one last time. Determined to understand the palette's power, Amaka spent the night researching sorcery and curses, desperate for any clue to break free from the palette's hold. She stumbled upon an old story about Adora, a sorceress who had created a mirror of self, a palette that not only transformed appearances but also stole pieces of their soul. According to legends, Adora's clients became enslaved to their own reflections, losing their identities to her magic. As Amaka read on, her reflection in the nearby mirror began to change. Softly at first, her eyes seemed sharper, her skin paler, her face unfamiliar. She blinked and the image flickered back to normal, leaving her with a cold shiver down her spine. She realized that the curse was not limited to her client, it was beginning to consume her as well. The pallet demanded a price that it would not stop until it had claimed everyone who used it. Fearful and desperate, Amaka returned to the old woman at the market, hoping she might know a way to break the curse. The woman was waiting, as if she had known Amaka would come. "You have seen the cost of vanity," she said, her voice grave. "Beauty without substance devours from within." Amaka pleaded with her for help, and the woman finally relented, offering a ritual that would sever the bond between the palette and her soul. "You must paint the truth," the woman instructed skeptically. "Use the palette not to create beauty, but to reveal what lies beneath." Amaka was confused, but agreed to follow the ritual. However, the woman warned her, "Once you begin, you must finish. Half-truths feed the curse. Do you understand?" That night, Amaka prepared herself for the ritual. She set up her workspace, light candles around her, and placed the palette at the center. Her hands shook as she dipped her brush into the colors, feeling a familiar surge of power. But instead of creating beauty, she began to paint her own self with chaotic strokes, revealing her fears, her insecurities, and the parts of herself that usually kept hidden. As she painted, her reflection in the mirror twisted, revealing visions of her clients, each face marred by anguish, lost in their own obsession. She watched as the colors on her face morphed, exposing layers of vanity, greed, and fear. By the end, her face was grotesque marks, and the truth of her actions stared back at her, raw and unfiltered. She felt as though she were breaking into the weight of her own secrets. As the final strokes was laid on her face, the palette began to pulse, almost vibrating in her hands. Suddenly, it cracked, and a dark, misty shadow emerged from it, swirling around her like tempest. Amaka felt a sharp pain in her chest, as if something was being pulled from her. She clutched the amulet, chanting the words the woman had taught her, urging the curse to release her and her clients. The shadow hissed, resisting her plea, but as Amaka continued, its strength began to wane. Finally, with a last scream, the shadow shattered, dissolving into the air. The palette fell from her hands, dull and lifeless, its colors faded. The curse had been lifted, but the weight of what she had done remained. In the following days, Amaka contacted her clients, hoping to mend what had been broken. Some of them seemed to remember little, their memories foggy, while others recounted strange dreams of losing themselves in mirrors. Although they no longer displayed obsessive behaviors, there was a lingering sadness in their eyes, as if a part of them had been forever altered by the curse. Amaka struggled with guilt, replaying each client's reaction in her mind. She wondered if they would ever truly recover, if the palette's dark magic had left an irreparable mark in their souls. For the first time, she questioned whether her ambition and desire for success had been worth the price. Haunted by her actions, Amaka stood before the mirror in her studio, the palette, discarded, beside her. She looked at her reflection, unadored, stripped of the illusionary beauty she had chased for so long. She saw herself as she truly was, but with all her flaws and vulnerabilities. And for the first time, she felt a strange sense of peace. She vowed to pursue her craft, with authenticity to enhance beauty without distorting truth. She felt it would be difficult to rebuild her reputation without the allure of the magic palette, but she was determined to earn her clients' trust honestly, to create beauty that came from within. Months passed, and although her business grew slowly, Amaka felt a renewed sense of purpose. She embraced natural techniques and encouraged her clients to see beauty as an expression of their unique selves. Words of her new approach spread, attracting clients who appreciated her genuine artistry. One day, she returned to the market to thank the old woman, but her store was gone, as if it had never existed. Amaka smiled, feeling a quiet certainty that the woman had been a guardian, guiding her away from the vanity trap. She left the market with a lighter heart, grateful for the lessons she had learned. The end. Thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed the story. Please give this video a like, drop a comment, and hit the subscribe button for more interesting stories like this.